Welcome back to the channel. I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, and in today's video, we are delving through the 6 first-round rookie quarterbacks selected in the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to take a look at their college production, their strengths, weaknesses, surrounding cast, offensive coordinators, and what we can expect from them in 2024 and beyond. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. To begin, we are going in reverse order in which the quarterbacks were selected in the 2024 NFL Draft. So, we begin with Bo Nix, who was selected 12th overall by the Denver Broncos. He's 6'2", 214 pounds, so a little bit shorter than prototypical size for a quarterback, but not so short that it should really be that much of an issue for him to see over his offensive line. He is, however, 24.4 years old, so he is a little bit old for a quarterback prospect, but that isn't necessarily the end-all be-all for rookie quarterbacks. Joe Burrow, for instance, was a little bit older coming into the league, and while I don't expect him to be Joe Burrow, it isn't impossible for somebody that's 24 years old to be successful. When we look at his combine numbers, he ran a 4.71 40-yard dash. That puts him in the 80th percentile among quarterbacks and gives him an 82nd percentile speed score. In redraft leagues, he's being drafted as the QB 29 at the 1908. I think that is a reasonable value for you because I do think he's going to be somewhat of a threat in the run game. And in dynasty rookie drafts, he's being selected as the QB 5 and going off the board at the 203 in your rookie drafts. When we look at his situation, he is going to be the starting quarterback. We don't have to worry about that. It's going to be from week 1 on, which, considering he's already over 24 years old, it's a good thing. You wouldn't want him to be sitting multiple years like one of the quarterbacks that we're going to be speaking about in a little bit. So that is a good thing. Then we look at the running back room. It's Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, depending on whether or not he's able to make the roster, rookie running back Audric Estime, and Jaleel McLaughlin. So, a decent stable of running backs. They're probably going to be a little bit more run-heavy than pass-heavy to protect Bo Nix. But as far as his receivers, Courtland Sutton's a fine ex-wide receiver. He's probably middle of the league, maybe slightly worse at this point in his career in terms of the average ex-receiver. But a fine number 1 target. It could definitely be worse, and if you look at the rest of the depth chart, it's definitely worse. Josh Reynolds, he was exiled from Detroit, and after a decent season, he dropped some crucial catches in the NFC Championship game, contributing to the Lions' loss this past season to the 49ers. Marvin Mims was decent in the return game, but didn't really do too much. He caught a couple of deep passes. There have been positive reports about him in camp, though, so maybe he can make some strides in his second season. They also drafted Troy Franklin in the 4th round, who was Bo Nix's college teammate, so there should be some chemistry there for him, and who knows, he was ranked a lot higher in most people's opinions, and then he had a poor combine, which was reportedly because he was sick, and it kind of led him to slide a little bit. And at tight end, they have Greg Dulcich. He's good when he's healthy. He's struggled with injury a lot, but overall, this supporting cast is relatively weak. And then when we look at his collegiate production, he began his career at Auburn and struggled mightily. If you look at his collegiate production, you can see that his completion percentage went up every single year, as did his yards per attempt. So as he got more comfortable, he was able to have more confidence in himself to be able to throw the ball downfield. His touchdown-to-interception ratio usually wasn't too bad either, but especially in the final 2 seasons in which he was a collegiate player, he really stepped up, especially in this past season. He actually set a record for completion percentage in college with his 77.4 completion percentage this past season. And if you look, his rushing floor is actually pretty solid. It's very underrated. When people talk about Bo Nix, people really don't give him enough credit. He's a solid scrambler and can be a threat in the read option game. When we look at the pass attempts from the Broncos, Sean Payton's still going to be the head coach and the play caller, so we're going to want to look at Denver's statistics from this past season. They were 28th in the NFL with 30.2 pass attempts per game. I expect that to be relatively the same. They're not going to want him to have to air it out constantly. It's only going to put more pressure on him. He doesn't have the requisite weapons to efficiently do that, in my opinion. And it would be really just a bad idea for his longevity in the NFL to put that much pressure on him. And when we look at their offensive line, they're ranked around 17th, so right around the middle of the pack. They have Garrett Bowles, Ben Powers, Luke Wattenberg, Quinn Miners, and Mike McGlinchey. It's a solid offensive line. You definitely could do a little bit better, especially in terms of the left tackle position. Mike McGlinchey's fine. But overall, I think this is going to be a little bit stronger of a run blocking unit than a pass blocking unit. But I really wouldn't worry too much about his protection. It could definitely be worse. So when we think about Bo Nix, he does struggle against tight coverage. He likes things to be wide open. I can't purport what he's thinking per se, but it does appear as though he doesn't trust what he sees sometimes and just wants things to be wide open, which at the NFL level generally just isn't going to be available. You have to make tight window throws with anticipation as well. You have to trust yourself, and unfortunately, you have to generally be correct or you are going to be replaced. He also, when pressured, does make mistakes. Fortunately, his offensive line isn't among the worst in the league, so with a balanced run game, he shouldn't be constantly facing pressure, but when it does creep up on him, I do kind of worry about that. But he does bring the rushing ability to give him an escape from the pocket and really keep the chains moving. And he's very good in the short passing game. See, his 6.8 average depth of target was the lowest of any quarterback in the 2024 NFL class. And so what that speaks to is Oregon liked to set up their receivers with a lot of yak, so he'd run a lot of slants and short routes, and it was schemed up so that the receivers obviously could get a lot of yak and be efficient that way. And another stat is 329 of his 470 passes were to wide open targets, and on those throws, 74.4% of those yards came from yards after catch. So in my opinion, I don't think that this is going to work out the best for him. Sean Payton, I think, was really helped by having Drew Brees. I don't think he's the worst coach ever or anything. I just think that Bo Nix is going to struggle because he just doesn't have the offensive weapons around him to be incredibly successful. This is the NFL. He's going to need to trust himself to be able to make the throws with anticipation, but he is going to be able to buy himself some time with his rushing and scrambling ability. I just don't think that his ceiling is going to be that high because he really doesn't have the best arm in terms of actual arm strength. His touch is fine, but overall, I don't really believe in him as a long-term starter. I think he's really going to struggle in the NFL, and I think it's going to be a lot of it on the surrounding cast, as well as the immense expectations that are going to be placed on him to immediately be a starter in a less than ideal situation. Next, we have Vikings quarterback J.J. McCarthy. He's 6'3", 219 pounds, so not quite prototypical size in terms of his height, but at 6'3", you're not going to have any issues seeing over your offensive line, and he's built enough to sustain hits at the NFL level. He was drafted at the 110. The Vikings traded up one pick in order to acquire him. He's only 21.5 years old, so still relatively young for a prospect. And he ran a 4.57 40-yard dash, which puts him in the 94th percentile among college prospects at the quarterback position. And he has an 11.05 agility score, which puts him in the 90th percentile, which really speaks to his underrated athleticism, in which he's not given enough credit for. He's going off the board in redraft as the QB 23 at the 1508. I do think that's just a little bit high because he's not going to start for what projects to be a good part of the year. And then when he does start, is he really going to hit the ground running? He's going off the board in Dynasty Superflex drafts as the QB3 at the 107. I think that's one spot too high. I would rather have a quarterback in which is going after him one slot before him because I just believe in him as a talent more. But I think that it's reasonable to select him as a QB3 if you really believe in him and believe in the situation. When we look at the Vikings depth chart, it's outstanding. He really couldn't have gone to a better situation for his skills. They have Sam Darnold to start at the beginning of the year, which is great because you really wouldn't want to throw J.J. McCarthy right into the line of fire. They signed Aaron Jones. He's not only a fantastic rusher, but he's also a great receiving back. Ty Chandler's his backup. He's okay. Justin Jefferson's one of the premier wide receivers in the league. Jordan Addison, if he can stop being arrested, is going to be great as well. A very solid wide receiver, too, with a lot of upside. We'll see about his growth this season. Jalen Naylor's not going to offer you too much, and neither are the remaining wide receivers on this roster. But Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are going to be fantastic. Then you have TJ Hawkinson. He had an ACL tear in Week 16 of this past season. It's more than likely he's not going to play for a couple of games, but it's been reported that he's not ruled out for Week 1. Either way, J.J. McCarthy won't be starting at the very beginning of the season, which won't really affect J.J. McCarthy because by the time McCarthy starts, Hawkinson's likely to be back. But when we look at his collegiate production, you're going to notice that he really wasn't asked to do that much. He didn't really do much in his freshman season. In his sophomore season, he was more of a game manager, and he was really a game manager this past season as well. They had a great defense and a fantastic rushing attack, so he was really just asked to keep the chains moving on third downs. He is, however, a very solid rusher of the football. One of his collegiate seasons, he had over 300 rushing yards. He's not going to be Michael Vick. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels, Anthony Richardson, any of these kinds of quarterbacks. But he does have the requisite athleticism to keep the chains moving and be a threat in the read option game as well, just like with Bo Nix. When we look at the pass attempts per game from the Vikings this past season, they finished 6th in the NFL with 37.1 per game. This was with Kirk Cousins in town for the beginning of the season before his Achilles tear. They did continue to air it out, though, to try to make the playoffs and see if they could make a run. Looking at their offensive line, it's pretty good. It's in the top half of the league. They have Christian Darrisaw, Dalton Risner, Garrett Bradbury, Ed Ingram, and Brian O'Neill. Their strength in the offensive line are their tackles, which is good for McCarthy. It should give him some time to really be able to sit in the pocket and process what's going on. Kevin O'Connell is one of the better head coaches in the league. Seriously. Josh Dobbs came in, didn't know any of his teammates, know any of the plays. Kevin O'Connell was telling him what the plays were, where he should look with his reads, and guided them to a win over the Falcons when Josh Dobbs just essentially had to be told what to do by ear every single play. That's the level of coaching that McCarthy's going to have. It's impressive. He is one of the better head coaches. That, along with having a solid line and very good playmakers, is setting himself up for a lot of success if he's able to hold up his part as a quarterback. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the concerns with him is he really only a game manager? So in 8 games versus ranked opponents, McCarthy averaged 15 completions, only 23 attempts, 183 yards, and 1 touchdown. So as stated in this, it is partially due to the effective running game and fantastic defense in which the Wolverines had this past season under Coach Harbaugh. So it's kind of a thing of, can he do more? And there isn't a ton of evidence of him having to, so you're kind of just going to have to make your own decision in that regard. But he was pressured on 30% or more of his passing downs this season, and does a relatively good job of avoiding pressure and getting the ball out quickly. So that is one positive quality that will help him in the NFL, because obviously the pass rushers are absolutely ferocious at the NFL level. But another thing is he was a little bit of a first-read quarterback. He liked to wait for basically Roman Wilson to get open, and if he wasn't able to find him, he would just start to sling it. He does struggle See, he throws with a ton of velocity sometimes and struggles to layer some of his passes with touch. So essentially everything's a bullet a lot of the time. That is something he is going to have to work on, but with Kevin O'Connell coaching him up, I do believe in J.J. McCarthy for the long term. I think he's going to be around the 15th best quarterback in the NFL. And for fantasy purposes, I think he can be a solid QB2 for you in dynasty leagues in the future. This year, I would avoid him as a quarterback just because he'll be a rookie. He might not start for a couple games. But I think he is going to have spike weeks as a QB1 due to the outstanding selection of playmakers and offensive line and coaching around him. Next, we have Falcons quarterback Michael Penix. He's 6'2", 216 pounds. He has dealt with a lot of injuries earlier in his collegiate career. He has huge hands, though, which is going to help him when it comes to cold weather games. He is in Atlanta, so he plays in a dome in the South, so his home games aren't going to be any worry in that regard, but that will help him when he has to play cold weather games. He was a bit of a surprising pick at the 108. The Falcons did sign Kirk Cousins, so it did shock everybody. I wasn't quite as critical about the pick, though, as some of the other people around were. I mean, Kirk Cousins is 35 years old, coming off an Achilles injury. I think it was rather smart of the Falcons to have some insurance. And just to get ahead of the game, I do believe in Michael Penix in the future. But he is 24.2 years old, so he is an older prospect, and it is a little bit strange that he's going to be probably 26 years old realistically by the time he's able to start. Definitely a little bit different for an NFL career. He didn't run in the combine, but in high school he ran a 4.7 140-yard dash. He's not an overly mobile quarterback, but he can get a first down through the run game if he needs to scramble, and he can definitely buy time. He actually has one of the lowest pressure to sack rates imaginable. It was tops in college, so he can get the ball out when he needs to quickly to help make up for his lack of athleticism. And in redraft, he's going off the board as the QB 35 at the 2406. I think that's fair because there is a chance that he plays this season. It's just his upside is going to be a little bit capped. And in Superflex, he's going off as the QB6 at the 208. I think that's a very good value for dynasty drafts because this guy is probably not going to ever be a QB1 because he's not going to offer much on the ground. But good luck getting a solid starter with top 10 draft capital who's going to be in what's presumably going to be a positive situation at the 208. That's a very good value. When we look at Penix's situation, he has Kirk Cousins going ahead of him, which I think is going to be good for his development. I think he was one of the more pro-ready quarterbacks, but it is going to help him to be able to sit behind somebody that's a solid starting quarterback and not be immediately thrust into the role of savior for a franchise. He's going to be surrounded by a rather good duo of running backs. Bijan Robinson's one of the best running backs in the league, but Tyler Allgeier's no slouch either, especially for a second running back. They're going to run a wide zone type of scheme here, which is going to be beneficial for Bijan Robinson. It's going to be better than the power run scheme that Arthur Smith was running this past season. Drake London's going to be their ex-wide receiver, target hog, going to be very good. Darnell Mooney's a little bit underrated. He's going to be more of a vertical Z for them, and they'll probably play a combination of Ray McLeod and Rondale Moore in the slot. Rondale Moore, I think, has more potential upside because he's a very, very good athlete, but he has dealt with injuries throughout his career. Kyle Pitts also suffered a terrible knee injury and has just received horrible quarterback play. This whole offense was just doomed the past couple of seasons with Arthur Smith and his terrible selection of quarterbacks, whether that be Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, or Taylor Heineke. The situation is much better now with two much better quarterbacks than any of the other ones I mentioned. When we look at Penix's collegiate career, he had a differing yards per attempt average from time to time, but once he got to Washington, he really stepped it up, and he is about as fearless as it is when it comes to just slinging the ball. And he has a fantastic arm. This guy can put the ball just about anywhere he wants on the field. I wouldn't quite say that it's elite arm talent, but it's very, very good. Roma Dunze, for instance, this past season, when he was anywhere on the field, Penix was just chucking it to him. He has a lot of trust in his receivers, which I think is going to bode well for both Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts and Drake London, essentially this entire offense is going to be boosted a lot by the fact that they're not going to be receiving worse than 32nd best quarterback play. When it comes to the rushing production, though, there's essentially none. Like I said, he's basically a non-factor. He can extend plays, though, buys time in the pocket really, really well, and he can run for a first down if he's absolutely forced to, but it's definitely not a strength of his game. When we look at NFL team pass attempts per game, I'm using the Los Angeles Rams instead of the Falcons this past season, obviously due to the coaching differences here. So, out with the Arthur Smith, in with the Zach Robinson in terms of their offensive coordinator. So he was the passing game specialist for the Rams this past season, and the Rams were 13th in pass attempts with 34.4 per game. I think you can expect relatively the same for the Falcons in 2024. They're set up for success with 2 quarterback upgrades. They still have Bijan Robinson, who is going to get a solid amount of carries as well and bring some balance to the offense, but Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and really Darnell Mooney as well, are great, great weapons for them. And I think they're going to air out the ball slightly more than average and be relatively similar with what we saw with the Rams this past season. Their offensive line is fantastic. They have Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Drew Dahlman, Chris Lindstrom, and Caleb McGarry. Chris Lindstrom is their best offensive lineman. Overall, there really isn't a weakness with this offensive line, even if it isn't full of overt studs. It's going to be fantastic. They're going to be good in the running game, and in the passing game as well. They're going to provide a lot of protection for Michael Penix in his NFL career. So Penix's accuracy is very, very solid. He's as fearless as it gets when it comes to just chucking the ball. He has a lot of trust with his receivers, which I think is really going to bode well for Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Darnell Mooney. We'll see about some of the other receivers. But he's not going to have any problems just deciding to throw the ball. He's a very, very, very good pre-snap processor. He's very adept at figuring out what the defense is running. And with him sitting on the bench to begin his career, I think that's really going to help him out in that regard. And one other thing, he throws a fantastic fade route. Seriously, look at some of Rome Odunze's touchdowns this past season. Drake London is going to eat on those routes. He also possesses some of the best deep accuracy in the class. Once again, go look at some of Rome Odunze's highlights, as well as Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polks as well. And arm strength, once again, is not an issue in any way, shape, or form. I wouldn't say he has elite arm talent, but it's very, very good. And with the new scheme, the wide zone scheme that the Falcons are going to run, it is going to lead to him needing to be able to somewhat extend plays, but he is very good at feeling where the pressure is coming from and getting the ball out quickly. His pressure to sack ratio was insanely low this past season and throughout his career really, but especially this past season. So I don't think he's going to have to worry so much about getting sacked at a consistent rate. He is going to have to use a little bit of his athleticism though. But overall, I really do believe in Michael Penix for the long term. I do think in terms of real-life success, he'll probably be, like J.J. McCarthy, right around the middle of the pack in terms of NFL talent. And in fantasy, I think he's going to be kind of like a Tua Tagovailoa if he hits his peak. Because just like Tua, there's really not going to be any rushing production there. But he's going to be very efficient in the passing game and is not going to have any fear or really issues with his accuracy. I think he's going to be successful at the NFL level. Now we have Drake May of the New England Patriots. Standing at 6'4", 223 pounds, he is the prototypical size for a quarterback in the NFL. He was selected 3rd overall by the New England Patriots. He's still only 21.9 years old. He is an early declarer, so that is good for him in terms of historical success rate for the NFL. He didn't run in the combine, but he ran a 4.55 40-yard dash in high school with and that gives him a 95.7 speed score, which is in the 98th percentile among high school college prospects anyways. So he is a very good runner. I suspect he's right around a 4.5 because while he doesn't have necessarily incredible acceleration at first, once he gets going, he gets going. He's going off the board as the QB 26 in redraft leagues at the 1808. I think that's fair because I do think he's not going to start the entire year. They do have Jacoby Brissett to start at the beginning of the season, which is great for Drake May. He is going to need some time to work out some mechanical issues such as footwork, his base, being consistent with his throwing mechanics, but he does the impossible things really, really well. He struggles with the easy things. It's kind of comparable to Josh Allen back in the day, who is coincidentally one of the players compared to him the most. And in dynasty drafts, he's going off the board at the 108 as a QB4. This is the player that I think should be swapped with J.J. McCarthy because I am a big fan of Drake May. I really think he's going to be successful at the NFL level, and I think the issues in which he has can be fixed. They can be coached up. Now, will that happen? Obviously, it remains to be seen. But his issues are coachable. Looking at his situation, admittedly, it isn't the best. So Jacoby Brissett's going to start for him, which is very, very good. They're not just going to throw him to the wolves in a talent-deficient situation and just make him do everything from the start. It's very good that Jacoby Brissett's going to be able to afford him some time to be able to sit back and learn. Then they have Ramondre Stevenson, who's a very underrated back. His advanced stats in 2022 were fantastic. He did deal with some injuries this season, which I think really hurt him. Obviously, his overall stats in play, but I think he's going to return to form somewhat at least this season. Then they signed Antonio Gibson. He's a very underrated pass-catching back. He's a converted wide receiver from college, by the way. Then Kendrick Bourne isn't really going to be too much for them. Demario Douglas is solid from the slot, but he's not going to play anywhere else generally. I guess you could throw him at Z, but you don't want him on the line of scrimmage. Jalen Polk, I think, is going to be a Z receiver for them, and sometimes split time at X and Y, but generally in the Z. He was a second-round pick this season. I do like him. He's out of Washington. Then KJ Osborne's a very good run blocker as a receiver, but not necessarily the best pass catcher. Juju Smith-Schuster's not been the same since his knee injury. Javon Baker has had some character concerns, which kind of hurt his draft process, but he can be dominant as an X wide receiver and ball winner. He'll just need to do some development. Then Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper are solid tight ends. They're not world beaters or anything. Just overall, this offense isn't the best. It is one of the worst offensive casts in the NFL in terms of playmakers. But there are rumors going around that they are trying to trade for Brandon Ayuk. So should that happen, which until it happens doesn't mean anything, should that happen, it's going to look a lot better for Drake May. When we look at his collegiate production, he didn't do much in his freshman year, but when he was able to start in his sophomore year, he had over 4,300 yards with 38 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions, along with over 600 rushing yards. That was a dominant season, and he was challenging Caleb Williams for the Heisman. Very solid season. Really, his only playmaker to speak of was Josh Downs that year, so he was doing that with a lot less than some of these other quarterbacks. Then he did take a little bit of a step back this past season, as did Caleb Williams. He had over 3,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, so a little bit of a step back. But Josh Downs was no longer in town. He was busy performing really well for the Colts before his knee injury. He did have half a season of Devontae Walker, who was a 4th-round pick. Devontae Walker isn't really anything special. He's just a vertical stretch wide receiver. So he was doing a lot more with a lot less. And he still almost had 450 rushing yards, So he's going to bring a very solid rushing floor, which is going to allow him to it's really going to give him some time to be able to progress as a passer, get more confident with his reads, and get his base and footwork in order. When we look at NFL team pass attempts per game, I'm using the Cleveland Browns from this past season because their offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, is from Cleveland. So they were fourth in the NFL with 37.2 passes per game. I do think this is going to have to stay relatively similar this season because their defense isn't going to be that great. Their offensive line is also among the worst in the NFL, which is going to hurt Drake May potentially. So there is some concern there, and I'll go into his pocket presence and some of the issues with that in a little bit. But their offensive line really isn't that great. Cole Strange projects to be one of their better linemen. It was a strange pick, as people were saying when he was drafted. And really, the strength of their offensive line is generally going to be to the right side. Their left tackle is a giant question mark, which is why I think it's very good that they're not starting Drake May right away. They're going to allow him to get acclimated to the NFL before just thrusting him out there when they're not expected to be a very good team anyways. So Drake May has one of the better arms in this class. He makes some impossible throws look really easy. He has probably around a top 10 arm in the NFL. He can make some of those Justin Herbert play-action boot cross-field throws. Those are very impressive, and his highs are incredibly high. But so are his lows. So he's generally good at avoiding pressure to begin with, such as off the edge from a slot, a nickelback blitzing him. But he does drift into pressure and makes life harder for himself than it needs to be after initially being quite good at avoiding pressure. I'm not 100% sure how coachable that is per se, but if his offensive line can get a little bit better and not throw him in terrible situations all the time, he won't have to worry so much about that. But his rushing ability is absolutely fantastic. Over the last 2 seasons, he had 42 missed tackles forced on scrambles, and he ranked 4th in scramble yards in 2023 and 2nd behind Jaden Daniels in 2022. So very underrated rusher of the football, which is going to be able to bide him some time and going to allow him to it's going to give him a better floor in the NFL. I think he's going to be used in the read option game and in the red zone in general as an offensive weapon in that regard. I really do hope, though, that they can at least get one more good receiver in this receiving room, because you don't want to draft somebody this high in the draft and then kill their confidence by not having the offensive line and playmakers around him for him to succeed. But I'll put this on paper. I am a believer in Drake May, and I do believe in his long-term success at the NFL level. I think if he really hits his peak, he could be around the 10th best quarterback in the NFL. And in terms of a fantasy player, I don't know so much about drafting him this year. I think if you can get him really cheap, around the QB 25 or so, if you could just stash him on the bench, he could provide some really good high upside weeks for you due to his rushing ability. But I think in terms of his long-term career, and especially in Dynasty, I think that he could very well be, at his peak, a low-end to potentially mid-QB1 on a good year. But I think at the very worst, he's going to be a very high-end QB2 with big spike weeks due to his rushing production. So now we have Jaden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. He's 6'4", 210 pounds. I think his playing weight is generally closer to 200 pounds even. He was selected 2nd overall by the Commanders in this year's NFL draft, and he's 23.6 years old, so a little bit older as a prospect. He was a 5-year player in college. He didn't run at the combine, but in high school he had a verified 4.50 40-yard dash. I suspect his actual speed is probably around a 4.4 to a 4.45, right around Anthony Richardson level of speed. Very, very good, but he is a little bit more dynamic than Anthony Richardson in the field. a little bit more comparable to a Justin Fields type, maybe a Lamar Jackson light in terms of his actual rushing ability. And in redraft, he's going off the board as the QB 15 at the 10:06, and in dynasty rookie drafts, he's going off the board as the 4th overall pick as the QB 2. I think in redraft, he's a very, very good value because even if he doesn't work out long term, his rushing upside is going to bring such a high ceiling and high floor that unless he's hurt, I really couldn't imagine him finishing worse than QB 15. As far as the dynasty is concerned, I am a little bit concerned about his ability to work at the NFL level, and I'll get to that in just a minute. When we look at his supporting cast, so he is obviously going to be the starting quarterback. They've already announced it. Marcus Mariota is never going to start for them, hopefully, for their sake. They brought in Austin Eckler, who's a great receiving back. Jaden Daniels hasn't been known to pass to his running backs very often, but he also hasn't had a ton of talent besides Rachaad White back when he was with Arizona State. Brian Robinson's a very underrated power back. Terry McLaurin's going to be a fine wide receiver one, quite underrated throughout his career. Jacoby Brissett's been his best quarterback until now. John Dotson's not the best wide receiver. You'd hope he's your wide receiver 3, but he's going to generally play Z for them. Luke McCaffrey is a skinny, lengthy slot wide receiver drafted this year. Dimey Brown, Zacchaeus, and Jamison Crowder aren't going to be too much for them. Zach Ertz is an aging tight end. We'll see if he has anything left in the tank. Trey McBride kicked him out of town in Arizona. And Ben Sinnett's a very athletic, kind of a George Kittle type of tight end out of Kansas State. I do like him for the long term. When we look at Jaden Daniels' collegiate production, it really wasn't that great until he came to LSU. But boy, when he came to LSU, he turned it way, way up. He had at least 700 rushing yards in each of the past 3 seasons, including 1,100 this past season. And he really stepped up to Heisman-winning levels, and obviously he was the Heisman this past season. So it is the career arc that you like to see. You don't like to see somebody succeed in the early portion of their career and then kind of flame out. You do want to see continual production increase, which, credit to him, he was able to do. He was, however, set up with fantastic tackles on either side of him, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. In terms of his wide receivers. He's not going to be in the same situation here. So it's more so a reflection of his situation that I'm worried about per se than his actual ability. So I'm not going to include the pass attempts per game from this past season for the Commanders because Cliff Kingsbury, their offensive coordinator, has been out of the league for the past couple of seasons at USC. He does, however, run an air raid scheme which worked well with Kyler Murray, and I do believe the scheme itself is going to work for Jaden Daniels and that he does fit the scheme. I just really worry about his situation here, and this is part of the reason why I worry about his long-term success and career growth. This is probably going to be the biggest reason that I'm not going to be quite as positive about Jaden Daniels' long-term success. It's the offensive line. Essentially, looking at their offensive line, it's barely a starting offensive unit. I mean, they're going into the season with 3 players at least that shouldn't even be starting offensive linemen. So if they deal with any injuries, it's going to be even worse than that. Sam Cosmi and Andrew Wiley are the only 2 starting level linemen on this offensive line. So I think he's going to constantly face pressure. He's not going to have time to really progress through his reads. And his pressure to sack rate was very high in college, actually. It was never below 20% in any collegiate season. It was actually over 30% in 2022. He did, to his credit, bring it down into the 20s in his Heisman-winning season this past year. But I think this is going to be what could potentially cause the demise of his career. I worry that it's going to be an RG3-like situation where he's just not going to be protected and he could very easily get injured and potentially just not be the same electric playmaker that we saw at LSU. I was worried for whichever quarterback was going to be drafted by the Commanders. If Jaden Daniels had gone to the Patriots, I would be much higher on Jaden Daniels than I am with him in Washington, and the same goes with Drake May. I would have been much more worried for Drake May here in Washington just because of how absolutely atrocious this offensive line is. And he's going to start right away. So I really worry for his confidence at the NFL level. And this even has more to do with just his situation than his actual talent as a quarterback. So here are some pros and cons of Jaden Daniels, and then I'm going to end it by giving my projection for him at the NFL level. So he has the best deep ball in the class. He layers the ball extremely well. He has great touch. He throws a magnificent slot fade. Look at any Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas highlight film, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. I think it's on par with Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams doesn't get enough credit because his receivers were just trash throughout his career besides Jordan Addison. But I would give Jaden Daniels the edge there because while he is throwing to Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, he generally gets the ball exactly where it needs to be. And obviously he brings a magnificent rushing floor to the table. He's going to buy himself a lot of time with that ability. One thing, though, is his pressure to sack ratio is alarmingly high considering how athletic he is. It was over 30% in 2022, and while he did get it into the 20s this past season, it is a little bit concerning, and it's generally because he doesn't have the best pocket awareness. He also generally misses some easy throws, which I think is partially because of his footwork and his base. One thing is I think it could be due to the scheme and may not be him in terms of his processing, is LSU like to run one side of the field reads where your first and second read is going to be on the same side of the field. A lot of times he would lock onto his first read, and if it wasn't going to get open, he would immediately look to run, which, to be fair, is his biggest strength and he's elite at, so it worked for him a lot of the time. One problem is all the NFL athletes are much better than in college, and the scheming is also better at the NFL level than it is at the collegiate level generally. So if he's not going to be able to progress from read to read and is going to look to scramble right away, that's A, going to lead him to some big hits, and 2, it's just generally going to keep him from being able to be a successful quarterback if he can't progress through his reads. Now, I have seen him progress through multiple reads at the collegiate level, so I know that he is capable of doing it. He's not stupid or anything. I just worry about tendencies in that regard. Also, as a rusher, while he's very quick and fast and is very good at ensuring that he hits the angles correctly, he does take some big knockout hits. So his awareness as a runner isn't quite on par with what you would see from Lamar Jackson, for instance. So health could be a concern if he's not able to get down and avoid some of these crazy hits in which he sustained in college. I think the biggest issue is going to be the terrible offensive line he has in front of him. It's going to be the general inconsistency with his franchise. He is going to be a good scheme fit for Cliff Kingsbury. I just worry about his pocket presence, his ability to avoid sacks, which is shown in his pressure to sack ratio, and his ability to progress through his reads consistently and not look to run right away, which could get him injured or just hurt his overall progression. I think in real life, if he's able to mask these deficiencies in his game, or at least just get a little bit better with them, I think his ceiling is probably that of a top 10 quarterback. In fantasy, in 2024, he could absolutely be the QB1 or just a QB1 in general. His rushing upside is absolutely that high. And in Dynasty, I think it's fair to select him at the QB2 overall, around the 104. I personally believe in Drake May a little bit more than I do in Jaden Daniels for the long term, but I absolutely understand that the upside is higher with Jaden Daniels than it is with Drake May. So overall, I am a little bit worried, and I don't think I think a lot of this is not going to be up to him. The offensive line and the just general inconsistencies with the Commanders' organization itself could be at play here. But he is going to need to show some improvement in order to succeed in terms of longevity at the NFL level. Finally, we have Bears quarterback Caleb Williams. He's 6'1", 214 pounds, so built like a taller Kyler Murray. He is a little bit short, so that does lead to some concern potentially for his over-the-middle-of-the-field ability to see over his offensive line. I'm not as worried as I would be for like Kyler Murray, who's 5'10", for instance, but he was selected at the 101, and he's 22.7 years old. He is an early declare, so despite being almost 23 years old, he's only played 3 seasons of collegiate football. He didn't run in the combine, but he ran a 4.56 confirmed 40-yard dash as a high school prospect, and I think he's right around a 4.48 to 4.52 in terms of his NFL speed. He is a danger in the running game, in the red zone especially. He had 2 seasons in college of having 10 or more rushing touchdowns, so he is going to be a threat, and he's crazy efficient in the red zone. He's going off the board in redraft as the QB 12 overall at the 905. I think this year he's going to be a top 10 quarterback, and I think any given year he could be the QB 1 overall, partially due to his elite traits and overall ability, but especially because of the situation in which he finds himself in this season and the future, really. In Dynasty Superflex rookie drafts, he's going 101 overall generally. Sometimes Marvin Harrison Jr. goes before him. I think he should be the 101 regardless of 10 or 12 teams or greater, especially if greater size of league than 12. This guy is a fantastic prospect. I think he's going to be amazing, and we'll get into why a little bit later. When we look at Caleb Williams' situation, it's the best I've ever seen for a first overall pick. They signed running back DeAndre Swift, who is a passing game weapon and a solid rusher in his own right, to a 3-year deal that's really going to be probably a 2-year deal for him. A solid running back. They have 3 wide receiver ones in DJ Moore, who was just signed to an extension. They have Keenan, a 4-year extension, by the way. So he has many years of being connected with Caleb Williams. They traded a 4th-round pick for Keenan Allen. He's going to be great for them this year. We'll see if he gets maybe another 1-year extension after this. Maybe not, though. And they drafted Rome Odunze, pick 9 overall. Overall, this is a fantastic set of receivers. DJ Moore is a better receiver in the NFL. I'd say definitely a top 15 receiver in terms of actual NFL talent. He's going to be generally a Z receiver for them. He's going to threaten the field vertically. They're going to give him free releases, but he can play in the X or the Y. Keenan Allen is generally going to play Y, but he can play in the Z. You don't want him playing X because he isn't going to have the speed to really beat press coverage and get open consistently from the X. But Rome Odunze is generally going to be their X receiver, but he has complete positional versatility to play in the Y or the Z as well. They're generally going to have Rome Odunze and DJ Moore running more vertical routes, and then Keenan Allen eating underneath. But their tight end situation is also great. They have Cole Kmet, who's a fine tight end, and they signed Gerald Everett. So they're going to have 2 pass-catching tight ends as well. This is a great situation. When we look at Caleb Williams' collegiate career, he came into Oklahoma as a freshman, took over the job from then number 1 projected pick Spencer Rattler, and didn't give the job back. That is impressive. Then in his sophomore year, he had a Heisman-winning season. He had over 4,500 yards, 42 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions. Then he had a down year with only 3,600 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 5 picks, which is better than a lot of people's peak year in terms of their collegiate production. But he also had over 300 yards in 2 of his 3 collegiate seasons and 10 or more touchdowns in 2 of these 3 seasons. So he is a threat in the run game and the passing game. So in terms of NFL team pass attempts per game, I'm using Seattle here because Shane Waldron was hired to be their offensive coordinator in Chicago. They ranked 17th this past season with 33.8 pass attempts per game. I do project this to increase slightly to right around 15th, maybe potentially a little bit higher than that, because he is going to be better, at least in my opinion, than Geno Smith has been. And they're going to run a lot more 11 personnel this year than they did this past season in Seattle because They're probably not going to deal with as many injuries along the offensive line. Their offensive line is in the top half of the NFL, if not, it's not quite elite or anything though. They have Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, Ryan Bates, Nate Davis, and Darnell Wright. Their offensive tackles are going to be fantastic for him. Their offensive line overall isn't going to be elite per se, I don't think, but if it can stay healthy, I think it's going to give him a solid amount of protection, and his playmakers are going to be able to get open quickly, and he's going to be efficient and sharp. So when it comes to actual arm talent in terms of his raw arm strength and his ability to get the ball where he wants, anywhere on the field, I think it's going to be right around top 5 in the NFL. He does need to work on his consistency with his deep ball, but he also was dealing with very poor receiver play besides Jordan Addison in his sophomore Heisman-winning season. He really didn't have that much talent around him. He was having to play hero ball every single game, which I think leads to some of his criticisms, is because if he didn't play hero ball, he was going to automatically lose every single game. He can make any throw anywhere on the field. He can contort his arm for different arm angles. He can throw lob passes, throw little pitches to people. It's crazy. He has Aaron Rodgers level pocket presence, and his ability to see defenders that really aren't even in his line of vision. He knows exactly where to go. His ability to extend plays and find crazy throws and leaping throws, he looks like the jump man sometimes when he throws, is like that of Patrick Mahomes. Now, will he turn into these players? Maybe not, but he has the highest ceiling of any one of these quarterbacks. I really wouldn't be shocked if he is the best quarterback in the NFL at some point. I wouldn't project him to be better than Patrick Mahomes or anything, but he absolutely could be, due to not only his abilities, but especially because of the situation that he's in. And this past season, he earned a 90-plus PFF grade in each of the following areas: clean pocket, standard dropback, early downs, and no play-action throws. So that shows he is a well-rounded passer that can excel regardless of what type of play is being run or generally whatever's happening in the play. He does, however, run with the football out wide, and it does lead to fumbles. He doesn't cover up the ball with both hands, so that does lead to an increased amount of fumbles as well. I will say, though, he's very, very good at avoiding interceptions. His turnover-worthy play percentage is one of the lower numbers in the class. So while he's constantly threatening the ball downfield, he has a very high yards per attempt number. He's generally intelligent with his throw selection. I think that this guy could very well be a top 3 to potentially the best quarterback in the NFL if he hits his absolute ceiling. This guy is special. He has traits of Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes. He's just an incredibly rare prospect. I think in terms of his fantasy value, he could be a regular top 5 candidate and could easily be the number 1 quarterback any given year if he's able to hit his maximum ceiling. So if you're a subscriber, you might remember the other day, 4 days ago to be exact, I asked y'all, who do you think is going to be the most successful in terms of their NFL career? Well, 33% said Caleb Williams, 33% said Jaden Daniels, 8% said Drake May, 17% said J.J. McCarthy, and 8% said either Penix, Bonix, or somebody else. I honestly expected this to be a little bit higher in Caleb Williams' favor. I'm curious, though, looking at Jaden Daniels, those that voted for him, could you let me know in the comment section below what led you to select Jaden Daniels? He absolutely could be the most successful, and I'm not even throwing shade at that selection. I'm just curious, though, what do you think is going to lead to him being the most successful in his career? Anyways, with some of these polls that you see, you might see them being put into videos in the future. So anyways, that's what I think about the 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft. But what do you think? Do you agree with my assessment of these players? Do you disagree? Please let me know in the comment section, and specifically let me know why. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, your NFL breaking news source, and the dynasty and redraft implications behind said breaking news. I am building a library of information with which you can use to dominate your redraft and dynasty leagues in 2024 and beyond. Please remember to like and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and have a good day.